Welcome back here to the Mountain Morning Show. We just finished our conversation with Billy DeMong of USA Nordic, which actually got us speaking about the Olympics, which is a perfect segue into this next conversation I'm about to have with Austin Schofield here with SLC 2030. Austin, how are you doing today, man?
Good, how are you?
Great to see you again, as always. What good news do you have for us about the Olympics, hopefully coming back here to Salt Lake City?
Well, the good news for Salt Lake is that they haven't dropped out of bidding for the Olympics, and so the USOC has stayed pretty strong that they're still interested in bidding for 2030, which is great news for Salt Lake.
And so there's been a couple of international cities that were major players, I guess you could say, for the 2026 Olympics that have actually pulled out now. How does that change things for 2030? I know our focus really isn't on 2026, and it's for 2030, but these changes actually affect the way we can, the way we will bid for 2030, correct?
Yeah, so the most recent news is that Sion, Switzerland, which was considered one of the front runners for 2026 actually, they had the backing of the government and everything kind of set up for them, teed off for them to have a successful bid for the 2026 Olympics. And they had a referendum I think it was in June, and the referendum turned their bid down, unfortunately.
So this is like a public referendum between the citizens of Sion, Switzerland, saying that they just would prefer not to have the Olympics.
Yeah, well, it was the canton that Sion is in, which is basically a Swiss state, essentially. And Graz, Austria, they're another one who pulled out just last week, actually.
Wow.
And the reason for them is they have a lack of political support in Austria, apparently. And
so the government isn't backing their bid, really.
There are some in the government who do, some in the government who do not. So just kind of like any political issue, there's going to be both sides.
Both sides of the aisle there. But you really, to get this bid and to really secure a solid bid, you kind of have to have the whole backing. Right, you kind of have to be, everyone has to be somewhat on the same page, at least the majority of the program there.
Right.
Let's talk about how these changes affect Salt Lake's future bid for 2030. What does this do for the 2026 games? How does this affect Salt Lake City?
Yeah, well, there is a possibility of the ILC potentially awarding the 2026 Olympics to Salt Lake if enough cities drop out. If they don't have any cities in the end, I believe they make their decision in September of 2019. If there are no cities, then I suppose there's a possibility of Salt Lake getting it, but I do think that's unlikely for 2026, just mostly because LA has a lot of the sponsorship rights already tied up, and the ILC made lots of deals with LA to make sure that everything goes well for those Olympics. And so unless the ILC kind of wants to go through a headache and make sure that things with LA and Salt Lake are kind of made harmonious, then that probably will not be the situation. There are still some pretty decent cities out there that are still interested in 2026.
Okay. And when you refer to Los Angeles, you're referring to the 2024 Summer Games, correct?
28,
pardon me, 2028 Summer Games in Los Angeles, which are already going to be there. And as you said, having that 2026 could kind of be detrimental, I guess you could say, to Salt Lake City, because people would be really kind of prepping for those 2028 games in LA. With them being maybe in 2030, we could kind of ride, I guess you could say, the coattails of the LA games and really use that to kind of bolster some momentum for the 2030 games there, which would be awesome. I think, as you said, the chances of it happening in 2026 are like unlikely, right? Because, but the thing is it's not completely ruled out, because as Billy was saying in our previous conversation, we do have the facilities for it. We are ready for it. It's just a matter of the USOC awarding that to Salt Lake City.
Yeah, that's the big appeal to Salt Lake, of course, is that we're one of the only former Olympic host cities that still have all the venues intact and everything like that. But there's still some cities in 2026 who have similar things. Italy is considering a bid and are going to bid for it, as well as Calgary, Canada, and they have a few of the venues left over from former Olympics they've hosted.
And so these are some pretty strong other venues, I guess you could say, for these games. If Salt Lake does decide to go through with the 2030 bid. Sorry, it got a little confusing there. The 2030 bid. What other key players do you think will be in that bid as well that will kind of be competing against? As you said, I know Calgary and Italy, but who else?
Yeah, well, I think Calgary and Italy, they're mostly focused on 2026 at this point.
Okay.
It's not to say they couldn't roll over to 2030, but a few cities that have expressed interest in 2030 are, of course, the American cities that we've talked about before, Denver and Reno.
Absolutely.
And then there's also a few international international cities that have expressed interest as well. Lillehammer, Norway has expressed interest for 2030, and I believe they hosted the Olympics in '94. And then there's also Sapporo, Japan. They're actually currently bidding for 2026, but they're leaving the door open for 2030.
as well.
And they've also said they're more interested in 2030 because there's some infrastructure changes that will be ready for the 2030 games and will not be ready for 2026.
Okay.
And so they're leaving both doors open, but Sapporo and Lillehammer, at this point at least, are really seem to be the international competition.
The international competition there. So some really strong competition, really. There's some really great venues out there. What would it do for Utah to have the Olympics come back? Obviously, we know the 2002 legacy has really come full effect here in the state. I mean, we're so proud of what we were able to accomplish in 2002 at those games. What would it mean for the Olympics to come back for a second time here to Salt Lake City?
That's a great question. Well, when the SLC Olympic Exploratory Committee was formed last year and then kind of ended with the February report, one of the things they did is a kind of a feasibility study, and they studied what happened in 2002 more deeply. And it really depends who you ask. Some people say Salt Lake 2002 cost $1.6 billion. Others say it costs around $2.5. And either way you look at it, the economic impact that was projected from the 2002 Olympics was $5 billion.
Wow.
So, and actually they did, as they studied it more, they said it's closer to 6 actually. So either way you spin it, they're doubling their investment, if not more than doubling their investment. And so a similar effect will probably happen in 2030.
And anyone who understands even the most basic form of investment knows that if you're doubling your investment, it's a good one, right?
That's right.
This is a good thing for the state. We hope it can come back. Where can people go to keep up to date with all this great Olympic news?
Yeah, well, you can follow my campaign on social media at SLC 2030 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Really, the whole goal, my goal in that campaign is to involve and inform people in the Utah Olympic movement, I like to call it. And so the informing aspect, kind of with the news that we talked about today,
Absolutely.
some of the 2026 bids that could potentially affect Salt Lake, but also the involving part. There have actually been 5 or 6 summer Olympic events that have happened in Salt Lake just this summer alone. We've had U.S. soccer, we've had U.S. archery, U.S. taekwondo, and U.S. weightlifting actually have had events in Salt Lake or in Utah just this summer. And so we also post events and try to get people involved in that
Involved
regard.
with that as well. So it's not just the Olympics. There's always great events happening, and it's a great resource to keep up to date with him. And I think you're totally right. It's we'd be not right to not have another one here in Salt Lake City again. I think we're ready for it, and I think everyone here in the state is ready for it as well. So thank you so much, Austin, for the great news. Appreciate keeping us informed there. As he said, you can follow him on pretty much every social media channel at SLC 2030 there for the bid. Hopefully we can get that going. We would love to have the Olympics back, and I would love to be able to experience the Olympics here in Salt Lake City. We'll be right back with much more right here on the Mountain Morning Show. Don't go anywhere.